Do you know what? Today is the first time in quite a long time where I felt genuinely quite negative, sad, and a little bit pessimistic as well. I'm going to try and explain why that is, and also just talk about the process of trying to understand what I need to do in order to shift my perspective, because it's important to acknowledge why we feel a certain way and why something may have had an impact on us. And for me, I watched a video on YouTube. It was Katie Hopkins, you know, that racist white supremacist Katie Hopkins, who actually seems really nice, and she just points out the obvious and tells the truth, and as far as I can see is intelligent, very morally centered, and is brave. But that's just my view on Katie Hopkins anyway. I like her. I tend to like people who divide opinion anyway, because they're speaking truth. That's why they divide opinion so much. She was in New York, and she just did a 5-minute vlog in New York, walking around the streets and showing what the situation was there with the restaurants and the vaccine passport mandate that they have in New York. New York, of all places, it's fallen under the control of those woke bastards. Anyway, so you're probably aware, but in New York the mandate is that you're not allowed to eat inside a restaurant unless you've been double jabbed. Now again, I don't have anything against anybody who's who's had the jab. I really don't. Personal choice. It should be personal choice, except it's not, is it? Because now people in New York can't exercise their right to be treated as fairly as everybody else in their society, with the same amounts of privileges and rights and freedoms. So she showed the sign on the restaurant wall saying, explicitly stating, unless you've been double jabbed, you can't come in here. And then she showed the people eating outside in the cold, and she just remarked about how nobody eating inside those restaurants seemed in the slightest bit bothered. They didn't care that the unclean had been ostracised, had been shunned. I don't see a real difference between what's going on there and what happened in the early days in the early to mid 1930s with the Jews in Nazi Germany. It's playing out differently, but it's the same, isn't it? And I'll tell you why it's saddened me, not because it's happening, although obviously that is sad, because as I've tried to argue on a number of occasions, I would fully expect any person in any period of time to have to deal with the threat of tyranny in their lives. We've just been really, really lucky in the West. Since the Second World War, there hasn't really been any existential threat at all. Hence the real moral degradation of society, because we've become too complacent and too comfortable, too lacking in perspective. My issue is not with the fact that there are tyrants, although few in number they are. My issue is not the fact that we will face tyranny, law of averages in a human lifetime. But my issue, as I've always tried to argue in these videos, is ordinary men and women going along with it. That's why it can happen. Even worse than that though. Not just going along with it, but then actively participating in a society based fundamentally on discrimination. And it got me thinking, well, should this come to pass in the UK, and I have my own thoughts around the vaccine passport scheme, I think it's destined to fail around the world. But there are clearly going to be attempts to bring them in this country. And I'll talk about England because, as I say, England is quite different from Scotland and Wales. I don't know what's going on in Northern Ireland. But I guess let me explain it this way. Should what is playing out in New York be playing out over here, how many people would happily be going along with it? Because they'd had their jobs and they'd just go sit in the restaurants and not give a second thought to the people who weren't allowed, simply because they've declined, not refused, declined a job. And the answer chills me because I know that a lot of people would just go along with it and they won't care, because that's what human beings are like. So it was just a useful reminder to me about where we are. England, for whatever reason, has one of the more liberal approaches to all of this so far, although there's always an undercurrent of psychological threat all the time, never stops, insidious. And I guess that is very, very destructive in equal measure as well. But it's a useful reminder that some of our closest allies, Canada, Australia, and obviously the blue states in the US, that don't represent American values or the values of the West at all, by the way. They've been hijacked, taken over by woke bastards, as I say. Well, but Canada, Australia, US, our closest allies. 3 of our closest allies, and fall into tyranny. It's a useful reminder, but a useful reminder to me, again, about human nature. I am not scared one iota by tyrants. I'm not. They exist. Primo Levi, an Italian Jew interned at Auschwitz, he said tyrants exist, but they're too few in number. The real tyrants are the ordinary men and women, ready to obey without question. And then, even worse than that, ready to obey without question, but ready to endorse a health apartheid without question. Morally bereft. And I will say this right now, anybody who goes along with this is morally bereft. Imagine sitting in a nice warm restaurant, eating your bowl of pasta or your steak and chips, whatever it is, and just looking outside the window and seeing another group of people who, simply because they've not undergone a health procedure, are allowed to enjoy that warmth and comfort. And they're not. I'm not thinking that there's something fundamentally and inherently evil about that. What does that say about all of those people? It says to me that they are morally bereft, that they are cowards, and that they are the tyrants enabling all this shit show, not the ones pulling the strings. Because the ones pulling the strings, as we've said so many times, can't pull those strings unless the ordinary men and women dance to their tune. So the useful reminder to me, forget vax passports, forget whether people have had the jab, and I don't care whether they have or not, it's their choice. What I can't stand is the coercion and the blackmail and the bribery. But useful reminder to me about how flawed human nature is, how so many people really don't have morals. They just don't. They've not taken the time in their life to understand what is right and what is wrong. And someone please explain to me, defend this system to me now. Someone please tell me, provide a counter argument that this disgusting, health apartheid scheme is beneficial to humanity? Explain that to me, because I'd love. But of course, will anybody? Of course they won't, because they don't want to, because they know they can't. They just want their comfortable lifestyles, and they think they're on the wrong side of history and take their morally superior platform. Well, in time, those people in those restaurants in New York, I hope, will be utterly ashamed when they finally are able to develop an outlook based somewhat on morals, and they realise how wrong it is what they're doing, as well as the businesses implementing it. And as for anybody who is choosing to do business with a business who's enforcing these disgusting mandates, giving them their business, giving them money, increasing their profits, why? Don't do it. If you don't like it, don't do it. Non-compliance means non-compliance. So yeah, it was an impactful video, that, for me. On the flip side, she did show the streets were full, and she was congregating with a number of people outside, and she said there was a real spirit of rebellion in the air, and great to be surrounded by people who do have some kind of a moral compass and fundamental moral fortitude. But again, what happens when the weather gets cold? You know, that's when it's going to be really testing. So a lot of my videos recently have been very optimistic, acknowledging positives. This one is a bit of a reality check, and just a bit just to ask those questions, really, about human nature, because I'm fascinated by it, utterly fascinated by it. How I don't think human beings are inherently good or bad. I just think they're so easily manipulated, and they can be manipulated into evil so incredibly easy. So there we go. So I'm gonna just let myself have a day of reflection today. If I don't do anything, so what? And yeah, just try to let it wash over me, and I'm sure whether it's tomorrow or the next day, I'll be feeling strong again, and I'll be feeling more positive again. And let's not forget, people, if you've actually been doing something to challenge this tyranny, you've earned the right to be positive. If you want to be positive, you be positive. If you want to be optimistic, you be optimistic. These people who've done fuck all, absolutely fuck all, but then say, we've just got to stay optimistic, we've just got to be positive. All right, okay, yeah. Well, they're the same people who will just happily go along with all this bullshit. They've not earned that right to be positive, to be optimistic. We have earned the right to really see those positives, acknowledge those positives, and acknowledge our role in why there are positives. So don't forget that, people. Anyway, right, I'll leave it there and enjoy the rest of this walk on this unseasonably warm October day. Don't forget to subscribe, and please leave me a comment, and I will speak to you soon. Bye bye.